Forced from power and his country, the former president of Gambia, Yahya Jammeh, has flown into exile to avoid a military confrontation. His departure after 22 years clears the way for successor Adama Barrow. Well, why is a smooth transfer of power in Africa often so costly? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem, Sika. After 22 years in power, Yahya Jammeh has left Gambia. The former president flew into exile, heading for Equatorial Guinea. He had refused to step down after losing the presidential election last month. The standoff caused West African nations to send in troops, threatening to remove Jammeh from office by force if he didn't budge. Well, Jammeh's departure marks a new era for Africa's smallest country. We'll talk about what it all means for Gambia in a moment with our guests. But first, this report from Nicholas Hawk from Dakar in neighbouring Senegal.
A last goodbye. Yahya Jammeh finally leaving Gambia, boarding a plane with his wife, close family members, to Equatorial Guinea. After days of negotiations with West African heads of state, the man who said he would rule Gambia for 1 billion years was finally forced into exile, bringing to an end his 22-year rule. A small crowd wept as the plane took off.
He left for the love of the Gambia. He left for the sake of Africa. He left for the sake of the children, the women, and the development Gambia have been undergoing for the past 22 years under his leadership. This man is not a coward. He loved Africa. He loved the Gambia. He sacrificed a lot for this nation.
Jammeh came to power at the age of 29 in a military coup. He then promised to restore democracy.
We have no plans to stay long. All we are here for is to set a just system and to put up structures that will ensure that what happened in the past 30 years would never happen again. And as to when we'll hand over, it depends on how soon we are able to put those structures in place. And as soon as those structures are in place, we return back to barracks.
But instead he ruled with an iron grip, imprisoning critics and political opponents. Human rights organizations accused him and his security forces of torture and enforced disappearances. Jammeh says he has magical powers. He claimed to have found a special cure for AIDS. But he needed more than magic to take on the young Gambians who in December voted him out of power. After accepting the election results and then refusing to stand down, West African countries sent 7,000 troops into Gambia to force Jammeh to concede defeat. Those forces have now left after Jammeh's departure. Adama Barrow is the country's new president. He's currently in Senegal. With Jammeh gone, he can finally come home, ushering this small West African country into a new era of democracy. Nicholas Hawk, Al Jazeera, Dakar.
Well, Jammeh initially conceded defeat to opposition candidate Adama Barrow following the presidential election in December. He changed his mind a few days later, launching legal action in the Supreme Court to annul the result. The West African leaders headed to Gambia to try to persuade Jammeh to step down. The talks failed despite several meetings. Regional leaders threatened to send troops to Gambia if Jammeh refused to leave office when his term expired on January 19th. And Barrow left for neighbouring Senegal, saying he feared for his safety. He was sworn in as president at the Gambian embassy in Senegal on Thursday, which is when 7,000 West African troops entered Gambia. Jammeh finally announced he was quitting on Saturday following talks with the presidents of Guinea and Mauritania. Well, joining us now to talk more about this in Dakar is Gilles Yabi. He is a former International Crisis Group project director in Senegal. In London, we have Joseph Ochieno. He is a West African political specialist. And joining us from Paris, Marie-Roger Biloa. She is the editor of Africa International. Welcome to you all. So, Gilles Yabi, let me start with you. What do you make of what we've seen in Gambia over the last 2 days? Is this a positive, overall, a positive development for Gambia and for Africa as a whole?
Yes, I think it is a positive development for Gambia, for the people of Gambia, and for the region. I also think that it is a success for the regional diplomacy, for ECOWAS, to have managed to get to this point, the departure of Yahya Jammeh from the country, without actually real military confrontation. And I think that the most important thing for Gambians today is the perception, the feeling of freedom, which is important. I think democracy is something which needs to be defined, and we can talk more about what it would mean. But one thing which is very clear is that the sense that they can express themselves, and that they are turning the page of 22 years of a very bizarre regime, even in West African standards.
You say that this now represents freedom for Gambians, but some uncomfortable questions about the price of that freedom, because all the accounts are that there was the risk of prosecution, which is thought to have been one of the reasons that Jammeh refused to leave office, and that he was given guarantees that he will be shielded from any prosecution. Was that a bargain worth going through with?
Well, I think this conflict between justice and peace is something that we face in numerous situations. I worked for a number of years for an organization working on conflict prevention, and it is very clear that in many cases there is a conflict between pursuing justice, which is absolutely key for long-term stability and long-term peace, but at the same time, in particular situation, you need to solve the immediate crisis and then create space for justice, which needs time and can take a lot of time. So for me, yes, there was a need to avoid a protracted crisis. The region cannot afford a new crisis in the current situation. So I think ECOWAS was right to push on diplomatic solution, and also the threat of military action, which has been, I think, decisive, crucial to make sure that Yahya Jammeh can leave the country. Then looking at the agreement itself, of course, there are a lot of guarantees that are being given to Yahya Jammeh, but I don't think that there is a clear word of amnesty in the text that has been negotiated, and I don't think that, again, that will necessarily prevent the families of people who have suffered from the regime from seeking justice at one point of the story of the country.
Joseph Ochieno, where do you stand on this? I mean, the fact is we have seen a peaceful transition of power in an African country, so many people will say that is something to be celebrated. But was this a reasonable trade-off? Was this the right thing to do, or did it come at too high a price?
I think, as already suggested, totally concur. I think it's a price worth paying, and coming from me, that is actually quite unusual. But I think the alternative could easily have been worse. Yahya Jammeh is a soldier. He's been in power for 22 years. These dictators come and take total ownership of nation states, don't they? The victory of the opponent was narrow, meaning that there was space for violence. And I think if we can save 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 African lives, so be it. And as already been suggested, there is no indication that, there's no suggestion that we may not be able to come back to ask these guys to answer questions, including to explain how they gain their assets. But I think I also concur that it's extremely important that, to me, this is a major victory that African institutions can work, and credit to ECOWAS that they are now taking a mini lead. And I think I can only think about probably only SADC next to them. I think following on beyond this, whoever comes into power in the Gambia or anywhere else in West Africa, this is the very same price thing, is that it's extremely unlikely that anybody will want to play a game. So I think it's a price paid for the Gambian people, but I think for West Africans, and I think this is a lesson for the rest of our African continent, that actually if we can take a leaf from these guys, that yes, we may be looking at a very, very different Africa 10 years from today.
But do you not worry, though, Joseph Ochieno, that this could foster a culture of impunity among African leaders, that a precedent may have been set here, that other leaders might follow, that they'll refuse to step down after losing credible elections, and then sort of bargain with the threat of war as a kind of bargaining chip to go into a life in comfortable exile?
You know, a similar thing happened in Kenya, and the end results were the very same guys came and sorted it out. But at the end of the day, more than 1,000 people had already died, and a loss of properties had already taken place. I totally agree. But as suggested, there is no guarantee that Yahya Jammeh may not necessarily answer for some of the atrocities he's alleged to have committed, and there's no guarantee that the property that he may be taking away, Gambian people cannot, after the new government has come in, establish itself a sense of stability and a sense of ownership. And you know what? I think the opposition nearly made a mistake at the beginning. Once Yahya Jammeh did a very unusual thing by accepting defeat so publicly as he did on television and congratulating his opponent, the opposition quickly came into sort of like grandstand that we're actually going to try you. The reality, unfortunately, is where we are. The starting base is that you need a bit of trade-off. And I think, to me, that was a fair trade-off today than whatever may have happened had they opted for rather a much more harder line. So a stick and carrot, I actually think that going forward across the continent, if a similar approach is taken, whoever wants to try Jammeh a system in West Africa will think again. And I actually suspect there's unlikely bound to be one in West Africa. I think probably we are now looking at Eastern and Central Africa, where some of these things may be considered. Anywhere else around the continent is very unlikely.
Marie Roger Biloa, you think this was a fair trade-off? And I want to ask you as well about the point that Joseph made there, that the opposition may have miscalculated this at the beginning and their victory by talking about holding Jammeh accountable for the accusations of abuse of power. What's your position on that? How do you feel about that?
Of course, and this shows how fragile it is when there's an election win and there's a long-standing incumbent president who accepts to go. And this is a very fragile moment where everybody should be very cautious because it is always reversible. And that's why the trade-off is acceptable, that you say, it's better that somebody like Yahya Jammeh, who was a dictator, he was not a very common, very usual head of state, as we know. And that man, that he accepts to go, and it's very, very foolish to come and threaten him. And also, I think everybody will understand that for the sake of transition and fostering democracy and rule of law, Mr. Yahya Jammeh should be granted some kind of impunity, because that's the way you have a process going on, that a new president, somebody is beaten, he leaves, he relinquishes power, another one comes in. We need to put that movement in progress. And also, one of the lessons I see here is that the ECOWAS, which was leading the whole process, although they want to mention the African Union and the UN in the final statement, the ECOWAS is really committed in defending democracy and rule of law, because we see the sister organization in Central Africa, CEMAC, has been unable to do anything in that sense whenever there are rigged elections, and there were quite a few. Let's just remind of Gabon. He didn't even issue a statement, and you see how proactive the ECOWAS is when citizens have expressed their will and the president has conceded defeat. So you have a clear situation. And they did it very, very smartly, where they didn't have to use force, but they had to show force, and a very clever mix between diplomacy and, I would say, military persuasion.
But where does this leave the Gambians who've suffered injustices at the hands of Jammeh during his 24 years in power, and they're waiting to have their day in court with Jammeh? Is there somewhere else that they can go for that?
Okay, I think this is not excluded, but I think while we are in a general movement of African countries trying to have those dictators go away after 20, 30 years, I think the main concern is to have them leave, you know, and the signal which should be sent here is that, okay, if you leave, you will have some advantages for doing that. So I think this is a good trade-off. It's not asking too much in this specific historic situation. We are in a transition. We have many head of state who don't want to leave, and we don't know how to make them leave. So if you have an opening like we had with Yahya Jammeh and also with, I will say, with the ECOWAS, I think it's safe to say, instead of having you, I would say, ruling over years and years, it's better that you go now, even if maybe some of your crimes will go unpunished.
Well, let's broaden this out a little bit now and give you a few examples of several African leaders over the years who have attempted to remain in power beyond their mandate. Some succeeded, other power struggles led to mass killings, and we're going to show you a couple of examples now. For example, in Ivory Coast, 3,000 people were killed in 2010 when President Laurent Gbagbo refused to cede power to rival Alassane Ouattara. Gbagbo was arrested by troops backed by French and UN soldiers. In Burundi, a third term for President Pierre Nkurunziza sparked a failed coup attempt in 2015. 400 people were killed during months of protests. Last year, Yoweri Museveni started his fourth decade as president of Uganda. Protesters who marched against him were arrested during a government crackdown. So some examples there of what's happened elsewhere in Africa, and this is why I suppose, Gilles, Yabi, many people are pointing to Gambia, what's happened in Gambia, as a positive sign, and what ECOWAS has done in presenting a united front against Jammeh. But some will say that because Gambia is a small country and geographically speaking, Jammeh didn't have much of a choice in the end. What do you say to that?
Yes, I think we have to be realistic, and one has to be realistic and about, ECOWAS interventions and the kind of achievement that you can have in particular situation. Gambia is not Ivory Coast. Gambia has not, the same kind of president as the others in the region. Yahya Jammeh has a particular personality, and I think that is a key element in the possibility that ECOWAS leaders have to agree on a common position very immediately after the result of the election. ECOWAS was clear in saying that Adama Barrow is the president and that Yahya Jammeh will leave after the end of his mandate. So having said that very quickly, ECOWAS has an obligation to make sure that it happens because it was a question of credibility for the organization. But again, if Yahya Jammeh has had a lot of support at the level of the overhead of state in West Africa, a common position which would have been more difficult to find, and a military threat could have not been, on the table. So it is important to see that what ECOWAS have been doing in the region is very good because it bases position on a number of legal texts which defend democracy and human rights, etc. But at the same time, in each situation in Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire, you have to look at particular crises, you have to look at the personality, and you have to look at the kind of relationship that the head of state have with the one actually who is causing trouble at one point. Yahya Jammeh has been isolated in ECOWAS for a long time, and a country like Senegal, of course, have been looking for an opportunity to get rid of Yahya Jammeh for some time. So this was an opportunity for the region to put an end to a regime which has been kind of a black hole in the entire region. And that's not, it's not just about democracy and the fact that the Gambians choose Adama Barrow. It's also an opportunity for the region to get rid of a regime which has been seen as a problem for a number of countries and a problem for West Africa.
Joseph Ochieno, if we look forward then, Adama Barrow as the new president of Gambia, what are some of the challenges that he faces, and is he equipped to lead effectively?
I think the last part of the question is a bigger challenge. My conversations with a number of Gambian professionals, many of whom are very excited about the change, but most of whom were extremely worried up to almost certainly the last 24 hours, is one, because they don't know Adama Barrow that very well. Two, which is now much more important to your question, Barrow needs to come in and show a sense of unity. He needs to provide an element of leadership, and he needs to convey a message of reconciliation and moving forward, and then quite clearly put on the table a program of a sense of stability, economic stability, a sense of hope for Gambian, the diaspora, which is a big player in this, and then those guys at home give confidence to the rest of the world that Gambia is open to business. This is a nation that derives most of its opportunities from tourism and its diaspora and agricultural potential, which is huge, and credit, of course, to Yahya Jammeh. He opened it up a bit, particularly with some basic investments in infrastructure relative to where he was. So going forward, I think that's sort of his way he needs to be able to do. If he's able to bring the nation together, some of the issues that we're discussing much earlier, it is possible for us to be able to have this conversation 3 or 4, 5 years going forward. And nobody will say that he's witch hunting. But for the moment, I'm afraid he really needs to provide the leadership and a sense of clarity, basically what he's all about. That must really include introducing himself to the Gambian people, something many Gambian people don't know very much about as of this stage.
Marie-Roger, what do you make of Adama Barrow, and does he have what it takes to lead Gambia into a new era?
That's the point. I think whenever we have a situation like that one, like Yahya Jammeh, a dictator like Yahya Jammeh leaving, you know, that's the main issue. But of course, we don't look very much at the guy who's coming. But the point is that he must not be, I would say, a magician or somebody who will change everything for good, for the good. It's not sure. What people expect from him is to be sort of a transition man, coming from that long regime of dictatorship and also torture and a lack of freedom for the press and, you know, all the crimes the Yahya Jammeh regime has committed. Is when you come after a long regime like that, you should be a transition man into a real democratic society, which is not easy. And I agree very much with what has been said before, that he has a role to play as a link between the past and the future, and not antagonize all the people who were with Yahya Jammeh before, and you know, and play his role to maintain the institutions, to open up the country, to bring that feeling of a new regime coming in. You know, that's what people expect from him. If he does just that, I think it will be good. And that, at the end, when he's beaten, if he loses election, and that he goes quietly, and that we don't have this sort of psychodrama playing again.
All right, and on that note, we will leave it. Gilles, Yabi, Joseph Ochieno, and Marie-Roger below. Thanks very much for being with us. And thank you for watching another Inside Story. As always, you can see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.